Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our early start today's event. I'm Jason Marzak, the director of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center here, and great to have you all. I'm delighted to welcome Senator Ron Johnson, chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. Tom Carper, Senator Carper of Delaware, will also be joining today's discussion, and he'll be arriving shortly. I'm also delighted to welcome Politico, our media partners, for today's event. Our discussion today is on the economic reasons for avoiding tariffs within the context of a U.S.-Mexico deal, and I'm thrilled that that's the framing, that we reached this deal last week. Since last week, we inverted an unprecedented economic crisis with our number one trading partner thus far in 2019, which is Mexico. The cloud of tariffs that loomed over our heads for over a week would have caused great collateral damage to U.S. consumers. Tariffs are, after all, they're a consumption tax on the levying country, and in this case, on the United States, on you, and on me. The economic fates of Mexico, the U.S., and Canada are intertwined. That's the blessing from after 25 years of deepened commercial engagement between the three countries of North America. For every dollar in products imported from Mexico, 40 cents are U.S. content, which means that really today no product is really just Mexican or just American. We make products together. That's the result of 25 years of a strong commercial relationship. The U.S.-Mexico deal reached last Friday. A deal on migration now allows tariffs to be averted. But that doesn't mean we should take our eyes off the ball. We can't take our eyes off the ball. The anxiety around possible tariff implementation underscores the need to refocus on how critical Mexico is as a trading partner. I think that's a key takeaway, and the one that we'll address today. Beyond the impact of tariffs on U.S. consumers, we must think of the effects on our overall competitiveness around the world. By making products from Mexico more expensive and less competitive, we open the door to products from other countries outside North America. China, for example. The role of Congress over trade is essential, and that's why among the many reasons the President's view, Senator Johnson, is incredibly important today. You're all here because you wish to understand the economic reasons for avoiding tariffs and the economic consequences. I trust that today's program will help in that regard. Let me just take a moment. In a moment, I'm going to formally introduce and welcome to the stage Senator Johnson, and Senator Carper will be joining as soon as his train has pulled into Union Station. He's on his way here. Immediately following, Doug Palmer, Politico, will moderate a discussion with key industry leaders who will speak on the costs of tariffs for their products and the danger to North American competitiveness. That includes Beth Hughes from the International Dairy Foods Association, Jaime Castaneda from the National Milk Producers Association, Maria Zieba from the National Pork Producers Council, and Jeff Beck from the Auto Alliance. If you're watching via webcast, please use the hashtag ACMexico when you're tweeting about the event. Now let me go ahead and welcome you, Senator Johnson, to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Senator Ron Johnson to the stage.
Where do you want me to sit? I could sit closer to you.
Sit closer to me, yes.
Tom's on Senate time.
I promise I'll be nice. As I mentioned, Senator Johnson serves as the United States Senator from Wisconsin, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, and serves on the Budget and Foreign Relations, Commerce and Science and Transportation Committees. Senator, you were elected in 2010, re-elected in 2016. Beforehand, you were a business person. Maybe you still consider yourself a business person. CEO of Packer, a polyester and plastics manufacturer located in Oshkosh. As we were talking about beforehand, only a 45-minute drive from Lambeau Field, so easy to get to a Packers game even with a little bit of snow.
That is true.
Senator, I want to start off and ask you a question. Last week we were on the cusp of introducing tariffs on Mexico, which were thankfully avoided as part of a migration deal on Friday night. The possibility of tariffs, they brought many concerns for U.S. businesses, consumers around the economic effects, especially given that Mexico is currently our number one trade partner thus far in 2019. What are the economic reasons, in your opinion, that we need to avoid tariffs with a country, with Mexico, and also what would have been the ramifications for the U.S. economy?
Sure. First of all, I'll announce myself as an unabashed free trader. My business probably exported to 20, 25 different countries. So I understand global supply chains, and I also understand not only the value of exports, but the value of imports, which I think is oftentimes lost. But before I kind of answer your question, yes. I would like to just show a graph so you understand what the President was trying to do here. This is a chart that takes a look at unaccompanied children in red and people coming into this country illegally and being apprehended as part of a family unit. And what you see is prior to 2012, probably only about 3,000 or 4,000 unaccompanied children came to this country illegally apprehended. But after DACA, doesn't apply to anybody here, but it was used by coyotes as demonstration that we've changed our laws. It was the catalyst. They said, you come on to America, you get a piece of paper called a permiso, your notice to appear, and you get to stay. This bar represents about 1 million people that have come to the country, and you can see the exponential growth. In 2014, President Obama declared a humanitarian crisis when 120,000 unaccompanied children and people coming into this country as family units came in illegally and apprehended. In the first 8 months of this fiscal year, we're over 400,000, and the rate is growing. If we maintain maize rates for the next 4 months, we'll be over 800,000 for the year. So this is an out-of-control situation. This is exactly what President Trump was trying to, and has been trying to solve, but the President has not been getting much help from Mexico, and he certainly has been getting no help from the United States Congress whatsoever. So I understand his frustration, but I don't necessarily agree with the administration's worldview when it comes to the trade wars and tariffs. Again, I think the business community in general has done a terrible job. First of all, defending itself, defending the free market system, but also defending free trade. But fair trade and reciprocal trade. Now, I think it's true that in general, our trading partners have taken advantage of America's generosity. We've made our markets very accessible worldwide, which again has had great benefit to American consumers, but it has put American manufacturers at a disadvantage. So, tariffs, as you stated, are a tax paid by consumers of the country imposing them. It increases our cost of consumption. It increases cost of components. We're in a global supply chain. And so what we are seeing, particularly in Wisconsin, is not only have our farmers been retaliated against. Mexico is our largest export market for cheese, for example. But manufacturers who are participating in the global supply chain potentially bring in components from lower cost countries, assemble those components into some pretty sophisticated pieces of equipment, and then export those overseas. They're being put in an economic disadvantage. Yeah. And as I've tried to explain to this administration repeatedly, having experienced this, when you have a large customer overseas as a U.S. manufacturer, the first pressure put on you is they want you to manufacture in their country. They like that comfort. By the way, it's the biggest advantage America has. We're the world's largest customer. So manufacturers want to manufacture close to the customer. But you throw on top of that pressure a 25% permanent cost differential that a tariff would be, and you basically force them to move manufacturing for their international customers overseas. We're starting to see that at least contemplated, if not the beginning of that starting to happen. So again, I continue to urge the administration. I understand using tariffs as leverage to get a better deal. We updated NAFTA. Again, I thought NAFTA was a pretty successful agreement. Exports increased to Mexico and Canada by about $200 billion per year because of NAFTA, but need to be updated. The President, his administration has updated that at the USMCA. I hope all three countries ratify it as quickly as possible. I certainly want Nancy Pelosi to bring that up. We have to ratify that. And from an overall trade view, we'd be so much better off if we had a unified world demanding that China, first and foremost, stop stealing our intellectual property and start abiding by the trade rules.
Senator, you mentioned the get-go. I want to you mentioned on immigration. Mexico last week agreed to a number of different things. The relationship with the new government, with President Lopez Obrador, has shifted dramatically. That Mexico has really seen itself now as a partner for the U.S. on stopping the northward flow of migrants, because it's not Mexico's interest either to have folks traveling through their country that they don't know who they are or much about where they're going. A number of different measures were announced. The foreign minister last night at a press conference further details some of those measures, including beefing up on the southern border with Mexico. So this seems like we've now entered a new phase, and Mexico's willingness to cooperate, as we saw from the new president taking office on December 1, has now moved itself to yet the next level.
And in my contact with the new Mexico ambassador and their administration has been pretty positive, and I really do think they recognize this is a problem that has to be solved. It's really not good for Central America. as they see a brain drain, a human capital drain. It's not really good for Mexico. It's not good for America. So I really do think they want to partner with us to solve this problem. I also think it's in America's best interest that Mexico's economy is strong. One of the reasons we have this problem with Central Americans is their economy is not strong. We have shifted from Mexican economic migrants, 10, 15, 20 years ago. There aren't so many of those anymore because they have a vibrant economy. That's a good thing. Right. And it's an economy that can, again, engage in mutually beneficial trade with America. So we ought to be rooting for a successful Mexican economy because it'll make America's economy even more successful and reduce the pressure for people coming into this country illegally. And that's the problem. I think America needs more workers. We need a more robust legal immigration system targeted toward people who work. And that's hopefully what we can accomplish in Congress is fix the system.
Last year, Wisconsin-Mexico trade topped $6 billion. Nearly 100,000 jobs are supported in Wisconsin just by this important commercial relationship. Analysis that was done shows that tariffs, even at the 5% level, would have cost Wisconsin consumers an additional $145 million, as you were referencing before, $145 million for their imports. What does Mexico mean specifically for Wisconsin as a trading partner? And a follow-up question as well is, what's your message to Mexican firms? A number of Mexican firms invest in Wisconsin, Bimbo, Samex, among others, and also a number of U.S. firms have a Wisconsin presence that depend on that two-way trade. So what's your message to firms that might be a little bit skittish right now about investing in that supply chain after those tariff threats?
Well, first of all, get Mexico to ratify USMCA, because we'll try and do that here. Again, we need that trade agreement. We were talking in the green room earlier. I'm not quite sure at what point in time in our country's history where trade became such a bad thing. I think it's an unabashedly good thing. We were talking a little bit about Ross Perot, referring to NAFTA as the giant sucking sound. And as I just said, exports from America since NAFTA was signed have increased by $200 billion per year. So the only sucking sound I hear is exports from America going out to Canada and Mexico. Currently, right now, we have a 3.6% unemployment rate. In Wisconsin, I think it's about 2.8. We literally do not have enough workers for dairy farmers and for manufacturing. So it makes no sense to me whatsoever. When you literally have billions of people around the world that are underutilized, why would we in America want to be producing high labor content product? We ought to let the rest of the world do that and have our limited labor supply produce higher value-added products. And that's really what a global supply chain allows us to do. I think that's largely what happens. Now, there are dislocations. There's no doubt about it. But Congress has passed laws to help people in those areas of dislocations. Prime example is South Carolina. They were really devastated by the textile industry moving into Asia. But as a result, now they produce Boeing jets and BMWs, and they're making a whole lot more wages than they did in the textile industry. So. Again, you have to look long-term in terms of the benefits of free, fair, and reciprocal trade.
Yeah. And how does that also, strong U.S.-Mexico commercial partners, how does that play into the U.S.'s ability, something we were talking about before as well, to compete with China at a global level? Because the way we see it is strong North America, strong U.S., strong Mexico, strong Canada, allows for the North American commercial bloc to be able to more effectively compete with China at a global level. And how do those two play into
So we have to recognize the reality in a global market. Other people are going to access that low-cost labor. And they're going to be competing with American manufacturers for overseas customers. So if you want to compete overseas, again, if you just want to have Fortress America and only trade within America, I wouldn't recommend it. Our economy would be far smaller and far less affluent. So you have to compete in the global market, which means we have to take advantage of those global supply chains. We need to get those low-cost components so that we can, utilize that in our manufacturing. And by the way, even if you manufacture for your overseas customers overseas, you still have engineering, you still have administrative, you still have managerial positions in America, generally pay a whole lot more. So again, that's that value-added labor force participating in the global trade system.
One issue that's come up over the last couple of weeks is Congress's authority, as mentioned as in Article 1 of the Constitution, to regulate commerce. There's been some questions insofar as whether the actions, the threats of additional tariffs and the tariffs that have already been implemented might be a catalyst for Congress to reassert its authority to regulate commerce. Do you see that as potentially happening, or how would that happen?
I think in so many areas, Congress has willingly given away its constitutional authority to the executive, apparently because they're wimps and they don't have the courage to actually make some decisions. Mike Lee wrote an excellent piece talking about why we gave the executive tariff creating authority back in the 30s. It was after Smoot-Hawley tariff. I think the Congress realized that was a problem, but they didn't have the courage to repeal them, so they said, here, President Roosevelt, you do it.
Yeah.
And that really began the process where now the president has the authority on tariffs. I think it's well past time that Congress start returning and regaining that constitutional authority that's willingly given up. Morning, Tom.
Senator Carper, welcome.
I'm Tom Carper, and I approve this message.
So you'll be a co-sponsor of that bill then.
Senator, thank you for taking the early train this morning. Senator Carper serves as the ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, serves also as a senior member on the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, as well as the Committee on Finance, the senior United States senator from Delaware since 2001. And Senator, you've been elected to statewide public office in Delaware 13 times.
14.
14 times.
But who's counting?
Soon to be. Senator,
People tell you what I'm proudest of. 23 years naval flight officer, 3 tours Vietnam, last Vietnam veteran serving. And Ron, I've been down to Central America a whole lot. And I've probably been there as much as anybody in the Senate. And have a real strong feel for that part of the world. And I think an understanding how complicated the situation is. And some of the things we need to do. Yeah, I'm sure you and Ron have been talking about that. He and I agree on a fair amount. We probably disagree on some things.
Give him my chart.
But
You've seen that.
Eyes has a chart. This is good. Thank you.
Well, Senator, Senator Carper, we're speaking beforehand about the importance of avoiding the tariffs with Mexico, what the ramifications would have been for the U.S. economy, for Wisconsin specifically. Senator Johnson was also mentioning the importance of tackling the unauthorized flow of migrants, and we were speaking about Mexico's increased role and increased cooperation as a partner for the United States in doing so. Love to get some of your thoughts on this.
Well, the Mexicans have been asked for a while to do a better job at their border with Guatemala and to stem the flow and to deploy their own National Guard. I think they have been responsive to do that, maybe not as responsive as they could be or should be. We've asked them to take asylum claims within Mexico rather than send them up to our borders to do that. And they contend that they've agreed to do that. The president says they only agreed to do that because of the threat of tariffs. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. There's probably, and I suspect Ron's already talked about this, there's a number of things that can be done, need to be done. One of the things I like to say, Ron's heard me say this a million times, find what works, do more of that. And we used to have a ton of people, most of the people coming across the border illegally were from Mexico. And that's just flipped in the last 10 years. And one of the reasons why it's flipped is because people have found that they have good economic opportunity and a hope to stay right where they are. And most people actually would rather stay and live in a country that they grew up in and love. We've been trying to figure out why are these people trying to come out of Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador. As it turns out, most of them right now are not coming out of Salvador. They've had elections there. They have a new president. We had dinner with him here, right here at the Atlantic Council last month. A guy who's 37, 38-year-old former mayor of San Salvador. He's going to replace a 75-year-old guerrilla leader. Mm-hmm. And he says someone who likes us, wants to work with us. I think he's right where we ought to be in terms of economic policy, clean, lack of corruption. But there's the illegal immigration coming from Salvador right now pales by comparison to what's coming out of Honduras and Guatemala. And most of the folks that are coming out of Honduras and Guatemala are folks that are rural, agrarian, highlands, and they have got these guys, these coyotes. I mean, the traffic. They're smart. They would say, you don't have to walk through 1,500 miles to get to the American border. Take a bus, air conditioned, probably have restrooms, and we'll get you there in 24 hours. And that has to be. We have to go after that. We have to cut that out, shut it down. The Mexicans need to help us do that. But the other thing we have to do is we've recognized three major reasons why the illegal immigration is coming from the Northern Triangle. One, lack of economic opportunity and hope, especially in those two countries. Terrible drought situations. It's not just a one-year deal. We're seeing in my state, Ron's probably in his state, incredible amounts of rain. We have more rain, we can't even get on our fields in large parts of Delaware to plant our crops. It's just the opposite in Honduras and in Guatemala. The other thing, so that one, lack of economic opportunity and hope. Two, crime and violence. Three, corruption. They're going to have elections in Guatemala later in about 2 weeks for president. The best candidate, in my view, was their former Attorney General, Thelma Donna. They won't even let her come into the country to campaign. She's right there she goes after corruption. She's clean, and the bad guys fear her, so they're not going to let her run. They've knocked her out of the so they're going to have an election with frankly, no good candidates. No good candidates. In El Salvador, Bukele, he was terrific. He won by a mile. Just ran away with it. He's aligned with Thelma Donna. She's not even get to run. Yeah. And in Honduras, we don't even have an ambassador. We haven't had an ambassador for 2 years. And all that they're going through there, the threats of corruption and so forth, upheaval. Man, it's not just one simple solution. It's not just tariffs. It's a lot going on. We have to do not just walk and chew gum at the same time, but walk and chew gum, whistle, and tap dance at the same time. There's a lot to do.
I think what I'm hearing, I think from both senators is the importance of avoiding tariffs, the importance of how strong Mexico is as a trading partner for the United States, and the fact that there are a number of different ways to reduce the number of unauthorized migrants that are heading north. And I think as well, Senator Carper, the importance of investing in Central America as well, the importance of investing in creating economic opportunity, reducing corruption. Senator Johnson, reducing also the insecurity that pervades, that pushes people to go north. Seems like we're ripe here for assistance, increased assistance for Central America as part of that.
You know, a real quick point is, and Tom and I think agree on this, is it's America's insatiable demand for drugs. They've given rise to drug cartels. The drug cartels that operate with impunity, they're untouchables. That corrodes into the rest of civil society. Extortionists have destroyed or certainly harmed the public institutions there, which makes it very difficult for investment and development. So, you know, it is a massive problem. But we do need to recognize our role in that, in our insatiable demand for drugs. So we do need a long-term effort, public relations, educational, to try and reduce America's demand for drugs.
Yeah, Ron, before he came to the Senate, very successful business person and a very successful entrepreneur. These bad guys in these countries are very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And they can make money off of drugs. They can make money on trafficking drugs. They can make money on extortion of businesses. They can make money on kidnappings. They can make money in providing transportation, bus service to the U.S.-Mexican border. They're very entrepreneurial. And we got to be smarter than they are.
Senator Carper, I was looking the other day and I saw that Delaware's total trade with Mexico, about $500 million, is equivalent to the U.S.'s total trade with Serbia. And that, like Wisconsin tariffs would have
I think that's a lie.
That's a lie.
I don't think so. I don't know. I think that's fake news.
The fake news, right. I'll give you my source. Like Wisconsin, tariffs would have cost your constituents anywhere between $15 million and $80 million, depending on the level of those tariffs. I'd asked Senator Johnson before about the importance of trade for Wisconsin and the consequences of tariffs, because I think it's important to continue to discuss what tariffs would cost the United States and your states in particular if we go down that path. Why is Mexico such an important commercial partner for Delaware?
Well, actually, they're a close neighbor. That we raise chickens in Delaware, pollos, muchos pollos, and for every person who lives in Delaware, there are 400 chickens, and we used to eat them all in the U.S., but now we export about 1 out of every 4 chickens, and our best chicken customer, pollos, is Mexico. They're good. Canada, with this rework of NAFTA, hopefully Canada is going to be a little better partner, but Mexico has been great forever. And we want to be able to continue to extend that market down into Central and South America going forward. But the real concern with tariffs, Ron, I think we agree on this as well. We don't create jobs in this country. He and I, however smart we might be, our staffs, presidents, governors, don't create jobs. I was governor of Delaware for 8 years. More jobs were created in those 8 years in Delaware than any 8-year period in the history of the state of Delaware. I did not create one of them. But what I focused on doing was creating a nurturing environment. And the biggest thing for businesses, I've heard him once affirms this, and as a business person, as a leader of our committee, certainty. Businesses want certainty. They want predictability. They want stability. And right now they don't have it, and they need that. And I understand the need to push back against China, who's not really a friend. Mexico's a friend. Canada's a friend, and we need to be able to work with it to strengthen our partnership on many levels. Mexico has to do. They have to be attentive to our concerns, and I think they're trying to be. They got a new president. I think they're trying to be, but the need for stability and predictability is as strong now as it's ever been. Maybe stronger.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up here. Senator Johnson, any last comments before we wrap up?
Well, I completely agree with the stability. Of this administration, we stopped adding to the regulatory burden. That gave businesses a pause, optimism, have a more competitive tax system. That's why we've seen greater than 3% growth. We've seen business investment 10 times what it was in the last 2 years under the Obama administration. But the whole trade wars has created uncertainty, instability, and I can't wait for this administration to wrap up these trade deals with the rest of the world and then have the rest of the world go and demand that China follow the rules and stop stealing our intellectual property.
Senator Carper, final thoughts on the importance of U.S.-Mexico trade?
Delaware, not many people think of Delaware as an agricultural state. We are. I mentioned that I think we raise more soybean in Sussex County, Delaware, than any county this side of the Mississippi River. We export a lot of what we raise. We're going to raise other commodities as well, including beyond poultry. We're getting killed. Our farmers are getting killed right now. And I'm not sure what it's like in Wisconsin, but it's a bad situation. Commodity prices are down. We're unable to plant our crops in too many instances. And we got to do something about that. And it's not just about the rest of our economy, but about the agricultural economy, which is getting pounded.
Senator Carper, there's 4 chickens for every resident in Delaware.
400.
400, sorry. Senator Johnson, how many cows in Wisconsin?
I don't have that stats, but we have a lot.
We'll pick that up on the
Always
next.
the same ratio.
We'll pick that up on the next time we have you both back here. Thank you very much for coming this morning.
Thank you, Jason.
Please join me in thanking both senators. And I'd now like to welcome to the stage Doug Palmer and the panel, senior trade reporter from Politico. I'm sure someone whose work you read every morning. So Doug, please come up and join the panel as well.
I think so. Yeah. I don't. Yeah. Hi, Jaime. How are you? Yes. Yeah. Good one.
Well, good morning, everybody. I guess we'll get right in. That was a pretty interesting discussion with the senators, and I think that they've set a tough standard for us to meet, but I'm confident that with our foreign panelists today that we'll be able to do that. Just so that everybody knows who everybody is, this is Jeff Beck on the end. He's the Director of Federal Affairs at the Auto Alliance. Next to him, we have Beth Hughes, who is Senior Director for International Affairs at the International Dairy Foods Association. And then we have Jaime Castaneda, Senior Vice President for Policy, Strategy, and International Trade at the National Milk Producers Federation. And then next to me we have Maria Ziba. She is the Director of International Affairs at the National Pork Producers Council. My name is Doug Palmer. I'm the Senior Trade Reporter at Politico. I've been covering trade for probably I guess since around 2000, and by far, this is like the craziest period for covering trade that I've ever seen. But anyway, so there's a lot going on, and it's sometimes for a trade reporter it's difficult to know what to focus on any particular day. But today we're going to talk about Mexico, a little bit about the U.S.-Canada-Mexico agreement, and more specifically, what the impact of applying tariffs on Mexican goods, how that would affect industries here in the United States and consumers as well. Jaime, if you don't mind, could I start with you?
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about the importance of Mexico as a market for U.S. dairy products? Where does it stack up compared to other countries? And what happened last year when duties were actually imposed on Mexico because the steel and aluminum tariffs, and then Mexico took retaliatory action?
Thanks, Doug, and good morning to everyone. Actually, let me start by saying that one of the benefits of having so many topics about trade is the fact that actually, at least I've been doing trade for many, many years, and for the first time, at least my kids know what I'm doing, because nobody ever, I had to explain to people over and over what a tariff was. Actually, now we're sure pretty much everybody knows what a tariff is. Mexico is our largest market by far, $1.2 billion. That's a lot of containers of primarily cheese, powder. You know, we have hundreds of tariff lines in the dairy category, from fluid milk to yogurt and to different type of products. So for us, just the threat of not having Mexico certainly had a repercussion in producers' prices and producers' income, and manufacturing too. So when we impose those steel tariffs, obviously we have the benefit of having Mexico believe that we are very influential, just the same as pork and others, that they always actually have us in their retaliation list. So they immediately retaliate. Remember the truck conflict that we have with Mexico? They also retaliate against us. So they retaliate against cheese, and of course, just think about it. If you were exporting $1 million to Mexico, just as a small, medium company in Wisconsin, talk about Senator Johnson, all of a sudden, you have to actually add to that cost $250,000. That's a lot for a small company. So the 25% per se on prices internationally is not necessarily a big deal. Prices actually move sometimes 25% from one year to another. The problem is when you're the only one who has that additional 25% and your competitors don't. So obviously we haven't talked to China, but in China, for instance, we have lost our market because certainly we are at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah. Well, Maria, the same question for you. I know that Mexico is a large market for U.S. pork, but could you put it in perspective? How big is it, and what impact did the retaliatory tariffs that Mexico imposed last year have on your industry?
Yeah. Well, good morning, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for organizing this timely event. I think it's really good to have all of us up here talking about this, and it's definitely been interesting times in the last few years. Just to back things up a little bit, for our industry, we are very dependent on exports. Last year, we exported well over $6.5 billion of pork and pork products to over 100 countries, and we export over 25% of our production any year. Mexico is definitely our biggest market in terms of volume. Last year, we exported over 770,000 metric tons, or over $1.3 billion worth of pork and pork products to Mexico. And I think that the main reason why we've been very successful in Mexico and in Canada for that reason is because of the North American Free Trade Agreement. We went from a net importer of pork in this country before NAFTA to now a net exporter of pork. Like I mentioned, $6.5 billion last year alone. So for us, it's really important to have these markets and to have a level playing field where we don't have to pay these tariffs or face regulatory restrictions on our products. When it came to facing the retaliatory tariffs in Mexico, after the 232 metals issue came to light in effect and we placed tariffs on their exports of steel and aluminum, Mexico retaliated against pork in the tune of originally at a 10% duty, and then a month later that went up to 20%. We did some economic study out of Iowa State University that looked at what the effects were to our producers. And it cost our producers $12 a head. And to put things into perspective, a producer's margin is about $10 a head. So we were already down $12 per pig. On an annualized basis, that meant that our industry suffered $1.5 billion loss just last year alone annually on an annualized basis because of that 20% duty. So obviously, we have been bearing the brunt of the retaliatory tit for tat between the two countries. It's largely due to the fact that we've been so successful in Mexico, but it's definitely our producers have had to bear the brunt of this trade war, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jaime's point is well taken, that industries that have been successful in penetrating that market are sort of on the front line of any sort of retaliation, in response to whatever move the United States might make. Beth, but I mean, it's not just one-way trade to Mexico and dairy products. We import about $128 million worth of dairy products from Mexico. So that's the sort of goods that would have been hit with a 5% tariff if President Trump had gone forward with this plan, or if he reverts to it. So what kind of dairy products do we import from Mexico, and how would you expect consumers to see a price impact from that?
Sure, and thank you to Atlanta Council and Doug for having me up here. Like Jaime said, we export about 1.4 billion of product to Mexico, so 128 million coming in. It's a wide range there. So some of the products that we import from Mexico are ingredients, so things we put into other products to make something. So it's nothing that you would necessarily probably as a consumer buy on the shelf, but you could potentially see a product that uses that ingredient go up a bit. What we saw last year with our cheese exporters to Mexico, what they were able to do, and knowing that those tariffs were coming into place, they front-loaded a lot of their purchases. So before the July tariffs went into place, so they were able to do that and carry through, maybe till the end of the year. Some others told us that they split the tariff between their customer and Mexico. Tariffs went into place. So they were able to do that and carry through, maybe till the end of the year. Some others told us that they split the tariff between their customer and Mexico. So I would assume if tariffs were placed on the products coming in here, that maybe a similar arrangement would have happened. Maybe not the front loading because we weren't given that much notice, but the tariff splitting, or again, you just kind of pass it along to the consumer. As everyone knows, tariffs are taxes on consumers, so we would expect something like that.
Right. Huh. Yeah, I mean, one interesting thing about President Trump's plan was that it was going to begin at 5%, and then he was going to ratchet it up 5 percentage points every month, and it would eventually hit 25%. Presumably there would have been a deal before then. But Jeff, you represent the auto industry, and there are a few products as emblematic of our country as cars. A recent report from Deutsche Bank mentioned that the average vehicle price increase to consumers could have increased anywhere from $1,300 to $5,400 if President Trump imposed tariffs on Mexico. What impact would a 5% tariff on all Mexican goods have on automotive supply chains, and what impact would that have if the tariff did ratchet up 5 percentage points? each month?
So a 5 percentage point tariff would be absolutely devastating for the automotive supply chain. Auto parts actually go back and forth across the border several times in many cases before they actually get put into a completed vehicle. So the impact of these tariffs would actually be multiplied on the auto industry. Even at 5%, there would be billions of dollars in additional costs on the industry, and at 10, 15, 20, 25%, those costs would grow exponentially. But it's been touched on a couple times. I think it is important to mention, like in your question that you asked, that the tariffs are not paid by the Mexican government or even the people of Mexico. The tariffs are a tax on American consumers, and with those tariffs in place, vehicles will be more expensive, and fewer people will have access to newer vehicles, which are typically safer and more fuel efficient. So it'll have an effect that ripples through. Fewer sales will also mean fewer jobs here in the United States. The industry employs 10 million people, and so even a small impact can have a large number of jobs lost. And there's also the tax revenue to consider. The auto industry, between state and federal taxes, added about $205 billion in tax revenue last year. And if you saw a drop in sales, again, even a relatively small percentage of drop could have an impact on state budgets, federal budgets. I'd also just like to highlight before we move on, the auto industry is kind of in a unique position here because we're seeing tariffs from a whole range of areas coming at us. Obviously, there's the Mexican tariffs we're discussing today. There was the threat of tariffs on auto parts from Mexico that was floated a few weeks ago. Steel and aluminum, Auto 232, and a variety of other tariffs out there. And in an industry like the auto industry that really thrives on certainty, the amount of uncertainty that's being put in place by these tariffs is causing damage just even with the threat of them out there.
The thing you said about it affecting, I guess, state and local government revenue. Is there like any sort of analysis that suggests that there's a net loss of revenue if you raise tariffs?
We're going to sell less vehicles. Each tariff is unique,
right.
And to be frank, there's so many that we've got some studies, but we probably can't keep up with all the tariffs that are coming at us. But it's not just the selling of the cars, but there's a ton of different tax points that benefit the state and local. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear that.
That's interesting. If we could maybe take a larger perspective, not necessarily just from the dairy industry's point of view, it has to do with this kind of idea of tariffs as a source of revenue for the U.S. government, which seems to appeal to President Trump. So last year we imported about $350 billion worth of goods from Mexico, and we imported about $265 billion, and nearly all of that trade took place duty-free. So what's the advantage of that? Wouldn't it be better for the government to collect revenue on all those imports?
Yeah, I haven't seen any official number respect. In fact, we were trying to figure it out. I think there was a number that all the tariffs that the collection of the funds from the tariffs was somewhere between 60 billion, I think, that it was looking for. And the interesting thing is that obviously agriculture has, like Maria was saying, has been the one who producers, like Beth was saying. So our manufacturers and our exporters actually were able to keep exporting, even though they were actually paying this additional tariff, and it was costing. But what it did is actually lower the producer prices. So the 25%, if you look at the producer prices, actually they went below that 25%. So basically, actually manufacturers were able to continue to export, and our exporters do that. But who paid for that? It was actually the producers. So overall, with respect to tariffs, look, it's the same thing as when we hear about, look, we appreciate the president's efforts to actually have more sales or have any type of agreements with other countries in which they buy more product. But I'm pretty sure, like in the pork side or the meat side, in the case of dairy, we export, of all imports from Mexico, we actually take 70% of all those imports from Mexico come from the United States. So we pretty much actually have all the market in Mexico. So we don't need necessarily more help. What we need is what the senators were talking about, stability. I actually, honestly, don't buy, all these import tariffs actually go to Treasury, and they're not actually going to necessarily help more folks in the country. What people need here is a stability. Farmers, what they need is a stability, knowing actually that they're going to be able to export their products without having to encounter further retaliations.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, but kind of staying on the subject, Jeff, I mean, a lot of people feel burned by NAFTA. Senator Johnson defended it this morning, but a lot of people blame it for lost manufacturing jobs. So when Trump talks about raising tariffs on all Mexican goods, those people might think that sounds like a good idea. How would you respond to them?
That's a fair question. Like I mentioned earlier, there's about 10 million jobs in the United States that are supported by the auto industry, and those jobs rely on cross-border trade. There's some studies, I believe, that's actually on the handout there, that depending on the tariff, you could see tens to hundreds of thousands of jobs lost in the United States if tariffs are to go into effect. So we definitely have an impact here. But also, if you look at the exports of the United States, the auto industry exported just under $100 billion last year to various countries, to every continent except for Antarctica. And that number has actually doubled over the last 15 years. If we were to put tariffs, it would make goods built here in the United States less competitive. You would see the exports almost certainly drop, and that doesn't even take into account the retaliatory tariffs, which could have a further damage on our exports.
Okay. Well, I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about the USMCA, which ironically is this agreement that locks in duty-free trade between the three countries. I mean, we've had that in place for 25 years under NAFTA for most products. There are a few exceptions right now, sugar and tomatoes, because those are subject to special arrangements as a result of anti-dumping cases that have been brought. But for the most part, it's duty-free trade between the three countries. So, Maria, you guys already have duty-free trade under NAFTA, right? But is there any particular advantage to passing the USMCA from the pork industry's point of view?
I think there's a number of advantages for our industry. I think the hardest part about being a farmer, one of the hardest parts about being a farmer, is that you have a lot of variables. Right now what we're seeing is that a lot of our farmers can't plant their corn and soybean because of weather issues. And what we need is to have predictability in the marketplace and have the ability to export to a country at zero duties. So what we need as an industry is to really have and maintain what we've had in the North American Free Trade Agreement, and what we've been able to negotiate under USMCA has really helped fortify, at least on the pork side, the benefits of the NAFTA. We need to maintain that zero duty trade, like you mentioned, but it really helps our producers in the long run to have that predictability in an unpredictable world. We're constantly facing challenges domestically, whether it's on the weather or regulatory issues or new laws. And so what we need is to establish a level playing field. Now that has been established, we need to continue on in the future. Mexico and Canada account for 40% of our exports. And the longer that we are in this limbo without really knowing whether we're going to have a new updated USMCA or we're going to go back, that really creates that instability. And what our producers now need is to have that stability so that they can plan for the future and look at expanding our industry like we've been doing for a number of years.
Okay. Well, Beth, I just wondered if you could maybe address that point as well, because I mean, Maria's talking about the need for business certainty and how the USMCA would help provide that. But if President Trump is sort of willing to threaten tariffs to solve immigration problems with Mexico, do you really have business certainty if the USMCA is passed?
Right. I mean, we're like you said when you started this panel, we're in really uncertain times. This is a different kind of trade policy under this administration. We have issues with other trading partners like China, the EU not being part of TPP, so losing that Japanese market. USMCA, though, for us in the dairy industry, and we're working lockstep with Jaime and National Milk, we didn't have duty-free access into Canada. I mean, we still won't under USMCA, but we did see some marginal market access there. We did see, eliminating some of these trade distorting policies that they have in Canada that hurt us globally. So for us, it is a beneficial deal. And then signing it and getting it passed allows us to move on, right, and get other deals with other countries. Other countries are looking at this USMCA right now, and if we can't pass this, an update to a trade agreement, what does that say about us moving forward for other trade agreements and being a reliable trading partner and being able to come to the negotiating table and compromise and get this thing done and passed through Congress? I mean, they're all looking at this right now and waiting
and
while they are doing deals amongst other trading partners. So.
And what's your guess? I mean, it's already, today's like June 12th or something like that. Is it going to happen this year?
Well, I mean, we saw some good things said yesterday. The speaker is moving forward on naming the working groups. Chairman Neal thinks that we're able to resolve some of these issues. Maybe we'll have the implementing bill language by the end of the month. I mean, there's definitely, stranger things have happened. I'm not sure if there's enough time, but Canada and Mexico are also moving forward. I mean, if there's the will, I think it could be done by the end of the year. I think it's critical that it's done by the end of the year. We can't go past the end of the year.
Okay, well that's interesting because I hear people say that all the time. And Jaime, do you or anybody actually, do you agree with that? Do you think that it has to be done in 2019? There's no way it could be done in 2020?
Yeah, well, first of all, well said. She did a great job. I mean, let me actually go back to a very important point that Beth mentioned is the fact that actually if we don't pass USMCA, I mean, I know that Japan seems to, according to the administration, is going to be an easy negotiations because we're going to actually just, tell the Japanese, hey, you don't agree to all of this. We're going to impose all these auto tariffs. I mean, for the benefit of U.S. consumers. But the important thing is that we need more market opportunities. We need actually a free trade agreement with Japan. We need a free trade agreement with Vietnam. Southeast Asia is extremely important. So we need more market opportunities. So having said that, USMCA, we agree, it is critical, especially for dairy, because actually it's interesting because if you go back to when USMCA was finalized, people were talking about who were the winners, and they were saying dairy, and I can remember the other one. So for us, it's an important step forward. I would agree that it's certainly, if it's not passed now, it's not going to be passed in 2020. So it needs to be passed. Look for what Speaker of the House may or may not do after the implementing legislation is submitted from the administration to the House, and we'll see what the interaction exchange between the Senate and the House is too.
Right. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing because everybody is wondering, like, well, right now Speaker Pelosi is saying, we're not really ready for the implementing bill. Do you think that the administration will continue to sort of respect that position, or do you expect them at some point to say, we're going to send the implementing bill anyway?
Well, if something that has happened in recent past, like the speaker said, I'm not ready for the statement of
Right. Administrative
administrative action.
Right.
And the administration went ahead and submitted. So,
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll have to see.
Well, I mean, that is sort of an example of something that happened, but the statement of administrative action doesn't really start the clock on this trade promotion authority clock. But once they submit the implementing bill, then under trade promotion authority, Congress is supposed to vote on it within 90 days. And I guess everybody's sort of paranoid fears that that the White House would submit the implementing bill, and then Nancy Pelosi would say, oh, well, we're not going to abide by trade promotion authority. And there is a sort of a precedent for that. That's what happened, I think, in 2008 when the Bush administration submitted
Korea.
it was Colombia, actually.
Colombia.
The Colombia trade agreement. And so and it effectively killed any chances for a vote on Colombia that year. Well, just a few more questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Maria, when it comes to these tariffs, though, I mean, the idea of like President Trump imposing a 5% tariff or a 10% tariff or even a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Mexico. I mean, obviously you support the pork industry, but do you know anybody in the agricultural industry that would be, and you would oppose a move like that, but do you know anybody in the agriculture community that would perhaps, welcome increased tariffs on Mexican products?
Well, I can only speak on the pork industry's behalf. I don't want to get in trouble with some other industries, but our producers see tariffs as another form of taxes, and unfortunately, we don't have a 20% cost advantage in our production. So, we ate the cost when we were exporting our products to Mexico, and that's, 2018 was supposed to be a very profitable year for the pork industry, and we barely broke even. We saw across the board our exports declined. And in Mexico, which has been tremendously beneficial for our producers and exporters, we actually saw a decline in our exports to that market, and that trend has continued through the first quarter of 2019. So I think for our industry, we need to definitely pivot, get USMCA through the finish line, and really focus on establishing relationships with other countries and having those trade agreements with other countries, like what has been mentioned previously. I think the one thing that all of agriculture is behind are more trade agreements and the ability to have a level playing field, because I think we're very competitive as a country on ag and in other industries. And what we've seen time and time again is that when we are able to level the playing field, reduce those tariffs, and eliminate non-tariff barriers to trade, we can win, and that's all we want.
Okay. I guess I just wondered, though, looking at this maybe from Speaker Pelosi's perspective. I don't think she voted for the original NAFTA. She hasn't voted for a number of trade deals. She didn't vote for PNTR. Members of her caucus have traditionally been skeptical about trade agreements, and if they vote for USMCA and Democrats help pass it, then they'll sort of be responsible for that agreement going forward. So I just wondered, what sort of arguments would you make, or do you make to the Democratic leadership for why this is a good play for them, for why they should vote for an agreement that will give President Trump a victory that might actually, empower him, or might improve his chances of winning re-election?
I know it becomes a very political question, but it really, when it comes to the livelihood of people, we've seen that NAFTA has been extremely successful, at least for large part of the U.S. economy and especially agriculture. And that's why our producers have been very supportive of every free trade agreement out there. We've been advocating and lobbying on behalf of to pass these trade agreements. I mean, I think that ultimately the speaker is, I think she's leaving a lot of room to maneuver. I don't know if this is a positive sign, but we saw that instead of having 4 working groups like we thought we were going to have, we're having 1 working group. So I think there is this, you can interpret it the way that you want to, but at least there's this willingness to come together as a unified coalition as opposed to the administration having to go out and negotiate with 4 different groups. So I think that that's a positive sign.
Right. Jaime or Beth, is there anything you'd like to add on that point?
No, I think Maria laid it out in a great way. I think, there's a lot of new freshmen Democrats out there, and I think they're willing to hear and understand what trade means to their district. NAFTA worked. Everyone, saw those benefits, and so USMCA is just updating that. And I think maybe it's an easier vote for some people to take. But like Maria said, the fact that, the speaker hasn't, when we were going through this little exercise last week of the threat of Mexican tariffs on Mexican imports, we heard that, the Ways and Means Committee were continuing their work with USTR, and same thing on the Senate side. So that didn't halt, at least. I think that was a good sign. So I do agree that the speaker is being thoughtful and mindful about this, and I think they'll be able to resolve some of these concerns and move forward and get it done.
Right. So, and my understanding is many of those freshman Democrats came from districts that Trump had carried in the presidential election, and so maybe the argument to them is like, well, be wary of how you come down on USMCA, or you might not be, you might not win re-election in 20. What's the next year? 2020. I'd like to open it up to the audience. For any questions? Over here.
My question is for Mr. Beck.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Marilee, International Trade Today. My question is for Mr. Beck. Doug kind of alluded to this, but when we're in an environment where, even though we have a free trade agreement that says that products come in from Mexico tariff-free, we have an executive who's willing to ignore that. The side letter on autos, he said, what I'm going to do would supersede that earlier when he was talking about only tariffing autos. And as you said, the Auto 232 is still hanging out there. So I want to ask, is this freezing major capital decisions in your group? Are people just like, we got to wait until essentially all this goes away, maybe even this administration goes away, before opening a factory or co-investing in a factory?
So I wouldn't be able to speak on any individual company's plans, but I'd mentioned before that certainty is absolutely critical in the auto industry. The capital expenditures are large. These are big investments, and the less certainty there is out there, that definitely goes into consideration.
I know that you didn't ask about the ag sector, but I will chime in on this. For our industry, we have 4 new packing plants that have come online between last year and this year. And those decisions to expand and put in those packing plants, manufacturing facilities, frankly, in rural areas, those decisions were made years ahead, probably 7 years ago, 6 years ago. And if you look back on the timeline, our producers were looking at the ability to export to those TPP countries and then expanding TPP into Southeast Asia and other countries like the Philippines that expressed interest in joining TPP. And so, at least for the ag industry, it's very similar to the auto industry. There's a lot of capital that needs to be put in to expand operation, whether it's the farms or the packing plants, those decisions are made years in advance on the ability to be able to export. And that's the importance of being able to have and finalize negotiations and move forward with USMCA so that we can look forward into the future, just like we had done in the past, frankly.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, there's so much going on the trade front. I mean, we have the discussions with the European Union that we're trying to get underway, as well as the talks with Japan. And Jaime, I know that the dairy industry has long been frustrated by a lot of the European Union's policies. Beth as well.
And the pork industry.
And the pork
Everybody.
industry.
We're a unified front.
I know about the auto industry.
But anyway, so far it doesn't seem like agriculture is going to be included in that. But I don't know. Do you read the tea leaves any differently? Do you think that we'll have any sort of agricultural negotiation with the EU? If not this year, maybe next year after a new commission is formed?
Yeah, my crystal ball says that we probably won't have any negotiations until, there is that real threat of the imposition of auto tariffs. I think that Europeans have no interest of negotiating, and thanks for allowing me to then plug in our GIs, geographical indicators, and common names. For those of you who don't know this issue, this is the issue in which the Europeans are trying to take away all the names that they actually, all the immigrants that came from Europe, actually not only in the United States but everywhere in the world, began producing, like whether it's Parmesan or Valencia oranges or chorizo. I mean, anything that came from Europe, even the name of Chateau in a wine, they don't want for us to use that word. So they're constantly trying to appropriate, they're constantly trying to monopolize. There is a reason that we have more than $1 billion deficit with Europe, and a lot of people can say, oh, because those fancy cheeses from Europe. First of all, we're winning awards, and beating the Europeans on all cheeses all the time, same as the wine industry. And there is a reason why we can actually not export to Europe, and it is all the regulatory and tariffs that they do. They actually do constantly trying to prevent any importation of any product.
Right. Well, Beth, what would happen if, for example, things sort of not spiral out of control, but things escalate, and for whatever reason, Speaker Pelosi balks at passing USMCA, and President Trump gets frustrated and decides to pull out of NAFTA. Doesn't the EU have a trade agreement with Mexico? Wouldn't they be able to step in pretty readily and supply that market?
Yes, definitely. I mean, they modernized their agreement, and so now it includes agriculture, it includes a lot of the cheeses, and they have an agreement on geographical indications. So yeah, they can definitely step in, and as well as New Zealand. The TPP is in place, so our competitors can step right in and take our market share, and once they take it, they'll keep it, and we won't get it back. So it's a real threat.
And Jeff, does it make you a little nervous to hear somebody from the ag community saying that ag negotiations with the European Union won't really start until President Trump threatens a 25% tariff?
It's probably not the first time that I've heard it. But I would just highlight that 232 should it go into effect, it would not be a good thing. The Wall Street Journal's reported that the job loss could be 700,000 jobs in the United States. So to have that, have the 232 tariffs go into effect, even if for a short time, would not be beneficial to the country.
And I want you to make sure that I'm not suggesting that we encourage that
Not
happen.
advocating for it.
No, we're not advocating for that. We're just saying that the fact of life is that probably the Europeans will not engage in these negotiations with agriculture.
Anybody else have a question out there? Oh yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
I was just wondering, my name is Renata, I'm an international trade lawyer from Brazil, and I work a lot with WTO issues. So I wanted to, because you mentioned, several of you mentioned a lot of about predictability, stability, and rules-based system, and all these trade agreements that are being negotiated now or were negotiated in the past, they all refer to WTO agreements. So I'm always wondering, and I would like to listen from you, how do you see all this crisis from the private sector perspective? How do you see, is the WTO still important for you, isn't it? Or I was just wondering, from the private sector perspective, how do you see like this multilateral trading system, how it's still important or not? Just that. Thank you.
I nominate you, Marie.
The WTO has served a really important purpose and established the baseline for negotiations among countries and exports and trade. You know, it's established a trade regime among countries, but I think it's pretty clear that in the last few years there has been a breakdown, and unfortunately we're looking at there not being any appellate judges or not being a quorum for appellate judges in the near future, which essentially is going to break down the whole system. You know, I think that the Trump administration has some very they have some very strong convictions towards the WTO. In the past, we have seen how it has benefited our industry, but there have been issues that we haven't really been able to get through, and it's a very complicated matter. And I'm not really sure that we're going to be able to find a resolution in the WTO or move forward in the near future, as long as there's countries that have been blocking things. And I'm not talking about the U.S., I'm talking about other countries.
I think I would only add to Maria's eloquent answer is that, you know, I'll give credit to the administration about certain areas in which I believe the United States has been somewhat, rephrase that, allowing other countries to push the United States, and the WTO has certainly one of them, and I'll make it is clear public that India, for instance, has been one, in which they constantly have done whatever they can to prevent trade from moving forward. So I think that a stronger position and a reform of the WTO is the right way to go. We support the WTO, as Maria said, but I think that we support the administration in trying to actually make some changes to it.
Well, there is, like I said, there is so much going on trade right now that there's no shortage of questions. And Jaime did mention India, and and
you opened that can of worms.
Yeah, and the Trump administration recently terminated trade benefits for India, partially at the request of the dairy industry. Are you optimistic that that's going to lead to some sort of agreement that'll resolve the concerns you have, your market? We
certainly hope, and this is not just about dairy, and Beth can also add it. I mean, it's so many different agriculture, but other sectors too, in which we're always having difficulty to sell India, and they always hide for one reason or another reason. The reality is that India is one of the most protectionist countries in the world. And hey, like the Senator Johnson said, I mean, it's fine if they want to protect their farmers, but at the same time, I think that they need to also protect consumers, and allowing for the importation of product, for instance, in this case dairy, I think it's is something that needs to happen. And so we're very supportive of the administration's actions recently on India.
Question right here in the front from Jason.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for this excellent panel. Just a question for you, Jeff. You mentioned earlier in the discussion the impact that tariffs will be multiplied on the auto industry. Can you peel back that onion a little bit? What does that actually look like insofar as how those tariffs, or the, hopefully we've averted that for now with Mexico, but there's always the possibility of tariffs being a threat yet again. How does that have that multiplying effect on the auto industry? Of course, products move back and forth between the U.S.-Mexico border multiple times, and up to 9 times before final production. What does that look like, and what does it look like as far as jobs in the auto industry?
So, and you kind of touched on it in your question, but there's also just numerous tariffs out there that can affect the auto industry, and as various tariffs could go into place, you could see additional costs from each one. As far as the jobs go, again, it's tough to keep up with all the tariffs that are either being or being discussed. But the impact could be massive, whether it's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. The auto industry has jobs in every state and essentially every county in the entire country. So that impact would be felt throughout the entire country.
Oh, here's one more. Maybe we'll make this the last question.
Hello, my name is Paulina, and I'm an intern here at the Atlantic Council. So Mexico has a modernized agreement with the European Union in which, yes, they were very tough on the geographical indications, with not only with cheese, but also with wine. But there were some very important victories from the Mexican side and even from the agricultural side. They were able to put in the berries of Mexico as a geographical indication, and they also negotiated milder restrictions for the beer industry, actually. So they had a very large time span to start implementing the agreements. Do you think that if the U.S. negotiates with the European Union, that the agriculture sector can be creative and score some wins with the European Union in that regard?
Well, let me start by respectfully give you a different perspective. I don't think that the Mexicans actually won anything. The Europeans got 1,000 GIs, and they're going to go through a process in which it's INPI, which is the PTO of Mexico, that is going to bear the cost of having to actually register all these GIs. And in exchange of what? There's tequila, which is already registered in Europe, mezcal, already. There was nothing. There was 1,000 compared to 3 GIs from Mexico. So I think that actually, unfortunately, agriculture from Mexico didn't gain much, and that has been the case. The Europeans are negotiating with Mercosur. Chile negotiated an agreement with Europe, I think 10, 12, 15 years ago. They got a mere 1,500 tons of cheese. They have never been able to actually export 1 ton of cheese to Europe. So from that perspective, we, of course, will defend our interest when it comes to Europe.
Definitely. The only thing I would add is, there are a lot of agricultural issues, like Maria mentioned, from pork as well, with the EU. When we did TTIP, you guys remember TTIP? We tried, in the dairy space, in the ag space. We met with them, before the negotiations, during negotiations, specifically on GIs. How many meetings did we have, Jaime? Where we offered compromises, not that would be at risk to our products, but ways to kind of everyone could win, right? Yeah, solution. And then the regulatory stuff, the SPS stuff. Everyone in ag on the U.S. side came up with solutions, and they just shot them down. So are we going to exercise again and spend all of that effort again? I think that we're just tired in the ag industry dealing with the European Union. So I'm not rushing to that agreement. I'm rushing to finish USMCA let's get back to some kind of normal trade relationship with China, work on Japan, work on some of these other markets that really have potential for our industry.
Well, tired, that's something I can relate to, but given the hectic pace. Well, I said that was going to be the last, but I can't resist. Just if it could be real quick.
Not so much a question as a statement.
Yeah.
Thank you. As a representative of the European Union,
Sorry, guys.
I mean, I think we're time off. Last time I met Jaime, he was kind enough to offer me a drink, and I owe him one, so I'm going to be kind. I mean, take
You had a broken leg last night.
Did you
please
break
take
it?
that with a pinch of salt. I think we've had a perspective which we've heard before, and I respect that, but I think you're hearing a rather one-sided argument here on the GIs, on the import restrictions. We don't invent these restrictions just for you. They're ones that we have ourselves, and we respect these restrictions, whether it's on antibiotics or whatever. So it's not something we're inventing just for you. It's something that we expect of our own producers, and that's something that we will have to overcome in negotiations when we get to it, shall we put it that way.
Well, a discussion on U.S.-EU trade negotiations would seem to be a natural for the Atlantic Council, and maybe they'll do that at some point, and maybe they'll invite me back, and we can talk more about GIs and other issues like that. But I think that we kind of wandered off the subject of Mexico a little bit, but hopefully everybody got a good education on what the impact of tariffs would have on these three industries that are represented here today: autos, dairy, and pork. Pork.
Bacon.
Pork chops.
Bacon.
Yeah. So anyway, on behalf of the Atlantic Council and Politico, I'd like to thank our panelists and thank you for attending today's event.
Thanks, Ed.